Hey guys, today we begin with a man who had everything: wealth, land, servants, power, but not peace. And when a man has everything but peace, he'll burn the world just to feel seen. His name was Yataka, a name feared across the province. Born into gold and power, he expanded his estate with ruthless precision. Villages bowed when he passed. His name whispered like thunder, but beneath his silk robes and jade rings lay a deep and spoken emptiness, a hunger not for food, but for control. Yataka's latest obsession was Mount Kesa, a sacred hill that housed a modest Buddhist temple, hidden beneath wild fig trees and humming cicadas. It wasn't grand, nor adorned with gold, but people traveled for days just to hear the silence there. The temple had no locks, no guards, no wealth, just monks living simply. And yet, the peace that hung over it irritated Yataka more than all his enemies combined. It was the kind of peace that didn't need his approval, and that made him furious. He first approached the monks with gifts: silk robes, jeweled bowls, rare incense. In return, he asked only for a ceremony to bless his new villa. A small request, or so he thought. But the abbot, an old monk with skin like bark and eyes like still water, smiled gently and replied, "We do not bless palaces built on pride." That single sentence cracked something inside Yataka. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He smiled, a thin, icy smile that sent shivers through the servants nearby. The very next morning, men arrived at the temple with torches. The villagers watched in horror as the sky above Mount Kesa turned orange. Flames licked the rafters, the sacred bell collapsed, and ashes scattered into the forest air like prayers set on fire. The monks stood silently among the flames, refusing to flee, refusing to resist. And still, they did not curse him. They simply bowed. That night, as the village slept, Yataka held a feast. Musicians played, meat roasted, dancers spun in gold. And yet, he kept glancing toward the mountain, toward the black smoke still rising under the moon. Inside him, something stirred. Not guilt, not yet, but something colder: confusion. The next day, whispers reached him. "The monks have not left." "What do you mean?" he asked his steward. "They remain at the site, rebuilding." "Rebuilding what? There's nothing left. They've started with the altar, from stones and mud." Yataka stood, robe falling from his shoulders. "They defy me by doing nothing, by not fighting back." He couldn't understand it. If they had screamed, he could justify his actions. If they had cursed, he could blame them. But their silence was a mirror, and in that mirror, he saw something he couldn't name. So he did what all-powerful men do when faced with the truth they don't understand. He planned a bigger confrontation. He would go himself to the Buddha. He would offer gold, words, logic, whatever it took to get a rise. And if even the Buddha stayed silent, he would make him speak. He would make truth kneel. But as his caravan prepared for the journey, one of the villagers, a quiet boy who once brought offerings to the temple, left a bowl of flowers at Yataka's gate. There was a note tied in rough string: "He who burns a temple forgets the one within." Yataka crushed it in his hand. Still, he couldn't sleep that night. He dreamed of ash that whispered, of bells that rang without sound, of monks bowing into fire. And in the smoke, he saw his own face. The journey to confront the Buddha would take 7 days. But before Yataka departed, something compelled him to visit the burned temple one last time, not out of remorse, but curiosity. Perhaps he wanted to see if the rumors were true, or maybe he just wanted to mock what remained. He climbed Mount Kesa with a small entourage. No musicians, no drums, just silence and the distant chirp of crickets. When he reached the summit, what he saw was not ruin but ritual. The monks had not left. They had begun rebuilding, not in haste, not in protest, but with a stillness so complete, it unnerved him. The central altar had been outlined with stones, hand-picked from the stream below. Ash-covered bricks, blackened but intact, had been stacked neatly beside it. No scaffolding, no shouting, just monks moving in quiet rhythm, like breath. One monk carried water in a cracked bowl, pouring it gently over a smoldering log before bowing. Another swept the scorched earth with a bundle of reeds. And at the center, The abbot, his robes singed, his feet bare, sat cross-legged in meditation, facing the rising sun. No one looked at Yutaka, not even once. He dismounted, unsure why. Something about the scene made his usual confidence feel loud and childish. He cleared his throat. No one responded. He stepped forward, kicking dust from a collapsed beam. Still nothing. "What are you doing?" he finally demanded. The abbot opened his eyes, but did not speak. "I burned this place down," Yutaka continued, louder now. "I brought fire and ruin, and here you sit, like ants rebuilding a nest." The abbot stood slowly, brushing ash from his lap. "And do?" he asked calmly. Yutaka's jaw tightened. "And you should be angry. You should hate me, or fight me. Something." The abbot tilted his head. "Why?" Yutaka had no answer. The silence grew heavier. "I destroyed this place because you disrespected me," he added. "I gave gifts. I offered gold. You refused to bless my home." The abbot nodded. "You asked us to bless your ego, not your home." That sentence hit harder than he expected. A thin laugh escaped Yutaka's lips, but it came out brittle. He turned sharply and walked back toward his horse, waving his hand as if swatting flies. "Enjoy your rubble," he muttered. "Let's go." As he descended the hill, something inside him shifted. He had come for anger, for resistance, something to justify his destruction, but they had given him nothing, and nothing was worse than being ignored. That night, in his villa, he called for music again. This time, he drank too much. Dancers twirled, drums pounded, but the sound grated against his ears. One dancer, a girl no older than 17, stepped too close. Her anklet bells jingled like wind chimes. "Does your silence make you wise too?" Yutaka snapped. The girl froze. "Leave," he said flatly. She ran. The hall grew quiet. Again, he did not sleep. In the dead of night, he wandered into his private garden and stared at the koi pond. The moon reflected in the water, perfect and untouched. He picked up a stone and tossed it in. Ripples erased the moon. By morning, Yutaka had made his decision. He would go to the Buddha, but not to learn, not to bow. He wanted answers. He wanted resistance. He wanted someone to fight back, because deep inside, he sensed that if the Buddha didn't hate him, he would have no more excuses left. The roads leading to the Buddha's forest hermitage were lined with silence. No city noise, no gold-laced gates, no guards to clear the path for Yutaka's caravan of horses and silk-draped servants. Only trees, and the sound of leaves falling on soft earth. Yutaka dismounted long before reaching the clearing. Not out of humility, he claimed, but strategy. He wanted to appear equal, not superior. He walked with a calculated grace, every step rehearsed like a merchant preparing to negotiate with a rival king. But this was no king. This was Gautama, the Buddha, and he sat beneath a Bodhi tree, not on a throne. There was no crowd, no incense, just a few monks seated in meditation nearby, their breath barely audible. A child monk swept the path with a palm broom. The air smelled of wild mango and old sandalwood. Yutaka approached with a slow, confident gait, pausing just outside the Buddha's line of sight. "Are you the one they call awakened?" he said. The Buddha did not answer. "I've crossed provinces to see you, left behind wealth, lands, men." His voice edged with irony. "The least you could do is look at me." Still, no reply. The Buddha's face remained tranquil, half lowered, not closed, not staring. "I see," Yutaka said, lips curling. "You believe silence is stronger than speech. That stillness is a kind of power." He stepped closer. "But power, great teacher, is tested by confrontation. I came to test you." A few monks looked up, but the Buddha did not. So Yutaka reached into his robe and pulled out a small chest of gold coins, thin, flat discs marked with his family crest. "I offer this to your Sangha," he said. "A gift from the man who rebuilt the temple you lost." Whispers rustled through the leaves. Yutaka knelt and placed the chest gently before the Buddha, as if offering medicine. "Or perhaps," he added, "you'd prefer I burn this too, just to see if your monks still smile in ashes." The Buddha opened his eyes. They were not blazing with judgment. They were not sharp with intellect. They were clear like still water that reflects everything, yet clings to nothing. He looked at Yutaka the way a mountain might look at a storm, unafraid, unchanged. Finally, he spoke. Only one sentence, and it was not loud, not angry, not even directed at the chest of gold. The one who burns temples is already burning inside. The air felt like it had been pulled from the whirl. Yutaka did not move. The sentence echoed not in his ears, but somewhere deeper, somewhere unreachable, somewhere ancient. A memory sudden, uninvited broke through the silence, a flame, a begging bowl, himself, in rags, sitting under a tree, reciting verses not in pride, but prayer. He stumbled backward, his hand trembling over the gold chest. "What did you say?" he whispered, but the Buddha had closed his eyes again. Yutaka turned, face pale, and staggered away from the tree. The monks made no move to stop him. No one mocked him, no one gloated, and that made it worse. Back in his caravan, Yutaka said nothing. His servants watched him with quiet concern. The chest of gold remained behind, untouched. That night, as they camped beneath the canopy of stars, he sat apart from the fire. In the distance, an owl called once, and in the silence that followed, he realized he had come to challenge the Buddha, but it was he who had been seen. The caravan rolled back toward the city, but Yutaka remained silent the entire journey. His servants whispered among themselves, casting nervous glances at their master, who no longer barked orders or demanded comfort. He sat cross-legged in the rear carriage, staring at nothing, lips parted as if still hearing the echo of a single sentence. The one who burns temples is already burning inside. It haunted him not because it was cruel, but because it was true. And truth, when it finally lands, doesn't pierce at cracks. By the time they arrived at his villa, he was a man untethered. The grand estate, once filled with noise and laughter, now felt too loud, too artificial. The marble halls echoed like empty caves. That evening, he sat in his private treasury. Gold coins spilled like water across the floor. He picked one up and held it to the candlelight, watching it glint. How strange, he thought, that this coin, this metal I built my kingdom on, means nothing to a man who sees clearly. In a moment of impulse, he ordered his servants to bring a chest. Not a small one, a massive crate, carved from blackwood and lined with silk. Into it, he began pouring his finest treasures: sapphires, ivory statuettes, rare spices, scrolls from foreign lands. It took all night, but by sunrise, the chest was full, not of wealth, but of proof. Proof of repentance? Proof of fear? Even he wasn't sure. "I will return it to him," Yutaka said aloud. "To the Buddha, as an offering." His steward frowned. "But sir, he never asked for gold." "I know," Yutaka said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "That's what makes it heavy." The second journey was quieter. No entourage, just Yutaka, two servants, and a cart pulled by oxen. The forest clearing looked the same. The Buddha sat beneath the tree, as though time hadn't moved at all. A soft wind stirred the grass, and birds sang with no sense of drama. Yutaka approached slowly, the chest dragged behind him. He stood before the Buddha and bowed, not fully, not yet, but enough that the grass brushed his knees. "I brought this," he said. The Buddha opened his eyes. "I know it doesn't matter to you," Yutaka added, "but to me, it does. Every piece in that chest is something I once used to feel invincible." The Buddha said nothing. Yutaka continued, "When I burned the temple, I thought I was burning your influence. But I see now, I was only trying to burn what I couldn't control." The Buddha finally spoke. "Then why offer the gold now?" A long pause. "Because it still controls me," Yutaka admitted. The Buddha nodded. "And what do you hope I will do with it?" Yutaka's voice cracked. "Refuse it. Accept it. Curse me. I don't know. I just need to be seen." A deeper silence followed. Then the Buddha rose, not with grandeur, but with the grace of a man who understood the weight of hearts. He walked to the chest, placed a hand on the lid, and whispered, not loudly, not for drama, but like one might speak to a dying fire, "Gold, when placed in the hands of the blind, becomes chains. In the hands of the awakened, it becomes a bridge." Yutaka's eyes welled up. He expected rejection. He expected rage. What he got was redirection. The Buddha stepped aside. "If you wish to offer, then offer to those who still hunger. Let gold become food, not pride. Let temples rise not from stone, but from kindness. Yutaka fell to his knees. He didn't cry not the way children cry, but the kind of crying that doesn't use tears, the kind that empties something old. The monks gathered in the distance, not to applaud, not to celebrate, but simply to witness. And Yutaka, for the first time in his life, felt small in a way that made him free. That night, Yutaka didn't return to his villa. He stayed in the forest, at the edge of the clearing, lying beneath the stars with nothing but a woven mat and a bowl of rice offered by a young monk. The food was cold, the ground uneven, and the silence unbearably loud. But for once, he didn't command the night to bend to his will. He let it be. Sleep came in fragments. In his dreams, the burned temple rose again, not from bricks, but from breath. And in its center, the Buddha sat, whispering one sentence over and over: "The one who burns temples is already burning inside." It was the same line. Yet each time, it felt different, sharper, truer, deeper. At sunrise, Yutaka rose and walked back to the clearing. He found the Buddha sitting once again beneath the Bodhi tree, a few monks tending to a small fire nearby. "I need to ask you something," Yutaka said, voice low but steady. The Buddha opened his eyes. "When you said that sentence, about me already burning, how did you know?" A pause. The Buddha didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured for Yutaka to sit beside him. They sat together, the rich man and the awakened one, surrounded by trees that didn't care who ruled what. Finally, the Buddha said, "Because I have burned too." Yutaka blinked. "You?" he asked. The Buddha nodded. "Before awakening, I carried pride, rage, attachment. I searched through pain, through indulgence, through asceticism. I burned with the desire to conquer suffering, until I saw the fire, not outside but within." Yutaka felt as if the ground had shifted under him. "You're saying, I'm not beyond saving?" The Buddha smiled, not with lips, but with presence. "No one is." For the first time, Yutaka told his full story. Not the polished version told at banquets. The real one. He spoke of his father, how affection was earned, not given. Of his rise to wealth, not through brilliance, but brutality. Of his craving for validation, disguised as generosity. Of the moment he watched the temple burn and felt nothing, and how that nothingness had haunted him since. He spoke for hours. The Buddha never interrupted. When he finally fell silent, the Buddha said, "You saw the temple fall, but you did not feel it collapse inside you. Now, you feel it so it may rise again." That sentence struck harder than any rebuke. And in that moment, something broke open in Yutaka, not violently, but like an old door, finally unlocking after years of silence. He wept, not out of guilt, but relief. Relief that someone had seen his fire, and not flinched. Later, when he stood to leave, the Buddha handed him a small item wrapped in cloth. It was a single, blackened brick salvaged from the ruins of the burned temple. "This," the Buddha said, "is not what you destroyed. It is what remains." Yutaka took it in both hands. It was heavier than gold. He bowed, not for show, not for ritual, but because something inside him had dropped to its knees. As he turned to leave, a monk called after him, "What will you do now?" Yutaka looked at the brick. "I think I will rebuild," he said. Yutaka returned to his estate not as a conqueror, but as a stranger. The servants still bowed. The guards still stood tall. But everything felt hollow, like a lavish banquet served to someone who had just tasted truth. He placed the blackened brick from the Buddha in his private shrine, pushing aside jade statues and golden incense burners. Compared to their gleam, the brick looked out of place, ugly, simple, sacred. For days, Yutaka spoke little. He didn't attend court. He didn't summon dancers. Instead, he walked alone through the garden, hand behind his back, lips muttering fragments of teachings he barely understood. And then one night, it happened. He sat in meditation for the first time in his life, awkwardly, painfully, legs numb, back aching, but he remained. No monks guided him. No chants played. Only breath. In and out, in and out. Then, the world tilted. Not violently, not like thunder, but like a curtain being drawn back from memory. And suddenly, he was not himself. He stood barefoot in orange robes, the air warm with the scent of rice and jasmine. His name wasn't Yutaka, it was Tesaro, a wandering monk in a village long since turned to dust. He was thin, poor, and radiant with joy. He lived in a hut by a river, ate only what was given, and spoke only when needed. In that life, he had built a temple with his own hands, not to leave behind a legacy, but simply to house those who sought silence. He saw villagers bringing clay, bricks, and mango leaves. He saw a little girl painting a lotus on the wall. He saw himself chanting at dawn, not to be heard, but to listen to the space between the words. And then, he saw fire. A rich man, another man, not Yutaka, furious with the temple's growing influence, had burned it all. Tesaro had watched from a hill, palms pressed together, not with anger, but with compassion. This fire will return to him someday, he had whispered, not as punishment, as lesson, and as the flames rose, he had let go. But the karmic thread had not. Yutaka gasped and fell from his seat, his breath ragged. He wasn't dreaming, he remembered. That temple, that peace, it had been his, in another life. And now, lifetimes later, he had become the very man who burned it. His chest tightened not from guilt, but recognition. He had lit the fire he once forgave. He had become the test he once transcended. Tears ran down his face, not of regret, but of awe. He whispered to the night, "So that's why it hurts so much." That silence wasn't their weapon, it was mine. The next morning, he ordered something unthinkable. Clear the northern wing. I will live there, alone. No servants, no mirrors, no silk. He sent carts of food to the villages. He released his peacocks into the forest. He began eating with the laborers, washing his own robes, sweeping his own garden. His court was horrified. The rich mocked him, but the monks understood. In his solitude, he carved something into the base of the blackened brick. I have burned and been burned. I now build in silence. There was no thunder when Yutaka broke, no crowds watching, no flames, no screams. Just a quiet morning, a cracked bowl of porridge, and the sound of a broom against stone. He had spent weeks living in the northern wing of his estate, a place once used to store silk and ivory, now stripped bare of all ornament. No paintings, no cushions, just stone floors, white walls, and the blackened brick resting alone on a wooden shelf. Outwardly, he was calm, but inside, something was crumbling. He began hearing echoes. Not voices, not madness, just questions. Questions he could no longer avoid. If I have seen truth, why do I still feel hollow? If I am not who I was, then who am I now? What am I without the fear I caused? His wealth sat untouched, his servants dismissed. His former allies sent letters, begging him to return to council meetings, to wine halls, to the man he used to be. But Yutaka did not respond. He couldn't, because that man was dying not with violence, but with grief. Grief for a life spent chasing dust. Grief for all the silences he had ignored. Grief for how long it had taken to finally feel. He began dreaming again. In one dream, he was walking through a ruined temple, the same one he had burned, but it was no longer ash and rubble. It was filled with mirrors. Each mirror showed a version of himself. A child craving praise, a merchant making his first lie, a young man craving applause, a lord sitting on a throne made of fear. He tried to look away, but the Buddha appeared in the dream not as a glowing figure, but as a shadow behind the mirrors. And he said nothing, because nothing more needed to be said. Yutaka fell to his knees. When he awoke, the room felt heavier, the air felt thicker. He stood before the blackened brick, and for the first time, he touched his forehead to the floor in front of it, not out of ritual, not out of guilt, but because something inside him had finally collapsed. Not a collapse of ego alone, a collapse of identity, of the man he had tried to be, burned down by the silence he once feared. That day, young monk arrived sent by the Buddha. He brought no scripture, no lecture, just a single bamboo sapling rooted in wet cloth. This, he said, was planted where the temple once stood. The Buddha said it belongs to you now. Yutaka held it gently, as if holding a child. He didn't speak. He just went to the garden, found a quiet patch of earth, and planted it with his own hands. From that moment on, he woke with the sun, meditated at dusk, and watched the sapling grow. It bent in the wind, bowed under rain, but never broke. And slowly, like the bamboo, he changed shape too. Not with vows, not with sermons, but with quiet repetition. One morning, a servant crept to the garden wall and peered in, expecting madness. Instead, he saw Yutaka sweeping leaves into a neat pile, humming softly. The same man who once burned temples to feel seen, now bowed to leaves before stepping on them. It began with a single stone. Yutaka, no longer draped in jewels or commanding servants, walked into the edge of his estate one morning, where the land met the forest. He placed a single stone on the ground, then another, then another. He wasn't building a palace. He wasn't recreating the grand temple he once destroyed. He was simply marking a space for silence, for remembering. The villagers watched from afar. Some still feared him, the Lord who burned down a temple, but others had heard whispers. He walks barefoot now. He sweeps his own steps. He gave his gold to the orphans. One by one, they came closer, not to help, just to watch. And over time, just by watching, they too changed. An old bricklayer approached first. He said nothing, just nodded, picked up a chisel, and began shaping the stones. A widow brought a broken bell from a ruined shrine and offered it as a gift. A child placed lotus petals on the ground, and then, almost like a tide returning, they began to build. Not a monument to wealth, not a shrine to Yutaka, but a place of stillness. No one called it a temple. No one needed to, because the space itself began to breathe. Yutaka never gave orders. He only offered tea, listened deeply, and carried wood on his back. No one had seen him smile in years, but as the walls rose stone by humble stone, he laughed again. It was the laughter of someone who had burned through every illusion and come out the other side empty and full. One evening, as the final stone was placed, a monk asked Yutaka, "What shall we name it?" Yutaka looked at the setting sun pouring golden light over the humble structure. The bamboo sapling nearby had grown taller, its leaves rustling like whispered sutras. He replied, "It doesn't need a name. This is not the temple. This," he pressed his palm to his chest, "is." The crowd was silent, not out of confusion, but because they understood. The temple wasn't these stones. It wasn't even the act of building. It was what had been built within Yutaka. The fire he lit had burned down a sacred place, but it also burned down who he thought he was. And from those ashes, a quieter, truer man had emerged. That night, Yutaka sat alone under the stars. He whispered into the darkness, "You once said one sentence, and I collapsed. But from that collapse, I stood up as someone else." A breeze carried the bamboo's rustle like a lullaby. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in lifetimes, he felt at home. It was a year later when the boy arrived, thin, furious, eyes burning like Yutaka's once had. He stormed into the courtyard, fists clenched, demanding to see the man who burned a temple and got away with it. The villagers tensed. The monks rose from their seats. But Yutaka, he simply stood up from sweeping leaves and walked to the boy. He looked into the wild, angry eyes and said nothing. The boy spat at his feet. "They say you're changed, that you built this thing to make peace. But I lost my father when that temple burned. He was inside, praying. You murdered him." The air froze. A monk moved to step forward. Yutaka raised his hand gently. He nodded once, not to excuse, not to deny, but to acknowledge. "I know," he said, "and I carry that weight every morning." The boy screamed, shoved him back. Yutaka didn't fall. He stood still like a tree. The boy broke into tears, and that's when Yutaka repeated the sentence that once shattered him. "If you are right, what will you do now?" The boy looked up, confused. His lips trembled. "What? If I am the villain? If all your hate is justified? What will you do now?" The boy fell silent. It was the same silence Yutaka had once been pushed into. The silence where ego dies, where something new can grow. Yutaka didn't wait for an answer. He walked past the boy, picked up a bucket, and went to water the bamboo tree. The boy stood there for minutes, hours. He watched people pass, monks, villagers, elders, children, none of whom treated Yutaka like a lord. They treated him like a man, a monk, a quiet teacher. The boy's fury began to flicker. He sat down in the courtyard, and Yutaka, with no grandeur, sat beside him. They didn't speak for 3 days. They swept leaves together, they drank tea, they watched clouds move. And on the 4th day, the boy asked, "What did you mean by that sentence?" Yutaka answered, "It means revenge cannot rebuild. It means carrying pain is not the same as healing it. It means we can live inside the fire or plant something new." The boy stayed, not as a student, not as a servant, just as someone learning to breathe again. He asked to sleep near the bamboo. He asked to build his own bench. He asked if he could someday forgive. Yutaka smiled. "You don't have to, not today, but you do have to see." That evening, the boy placed a stone in the center of the garden, not to start a temple, just to remember. The final leaf seasons passed. The bamboo tree in the garden had grown tall, its canopy whispering ancient truths to anyone willing to sit long enough beneath it. Yutaka's hair had turned white, his steps had slowed, but his presence felt deeper than ever. The boy, no longer a boy, now sat where Yutaka once had, listening, sweeping, speaking rarely but clearly. People still came, not for miracles, not for spectacle, but for stillness. And they found it in the silence Yutaka had nurtured like a sacred fire. One morning, before sunrise, Yutaka rose before anyone else. He brewed tea, he walked to the bamboo, he sat beneath it, and watched the world wake. The wind stirred, the leaves danced, and one final leaf let go. It floated down in slow spirals, twisting gently through the dawn light, until it landed softly in Yutaka's open palm. He smiled. "Everything returns," he whispered. "Even me." By midday, the villagers found him still sitting, the tea beside him still warm. But he had already left, not in agony, not in fear, but in peace, like a note at the end of a song. They didn't build a statue. They didn't carve his name into stone. Instead, the boy, now a man, stood before the crowd, holding the final leaf. He said, "This place is not his monument. It is his mirror, a mirror that taught him to see, and taught us to change." And with that, he pressed the leaf into the soil beneath the bamboo. A small ritual, no chants, no incense, just silence, and the sound of a tree continuing to grow. Years later, when strangers would ask, "Where is the monk who built this?" the villagers would smile and say, "He built nothing. He only tore down the walls inside himself, and somehow, that gave us all a home."